When the cowboy returned home, he found an Apache woman lying in his bed, and his life was never same. The cowboy returned home with dust clinging to his coat and fatigue carved deep into his bones. Weeks on the trail had hardened him. Yet the sight of his small wooden cabin rising from the plains usually brought a quiet peace. That evening something felt wrong. His horse slowed, ears twitching, and the cabin door stood slightly open, moving with the wind. He reached for his rifle out of instinct, his heart tightening as he stepped inside. The familiar scent of pine and smoke was mixed with something unfamiliar: warmth, life. The fire pit still held glowing embers, as if someone had tended it moments before. Then he saw her. An Apache woman lay in his bed, her body still, her breathing shallow but steady. His worn blanket covered her shoulders, stained dark where blood had soaked through. For a long moment he didn't move. His mind raced with questions and warnings, learned over years of survival. This land was unforgiving, and trust often came at a deadly cost. Yet as he looked closer, he saw the truth written on her face: exhaustion, pain, and a strength that refused to surrender. She was no threat in that moment. She was fighting to live. Slowly, he lowered his rifle and set his saddle down. He poured water into a tin cup, his hands steady despite the storm inside him. When her eyes fluttered open, they were sharp and alert, dark with fear yet unbroken. She tried to sit up, wincing, but he gently raised a hand, signaling her to rest. Words were useless between them, so he relied on actions. He cleaned her wounds the best he could, tearing cloth from an old shirt to bandage her side. She watched him closely, every movement measured, as if memorizing whether he would save her or harm her. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the plains in fire and gold. Inside the cabin, silence stretched between two lives that should never have crossed paths. He wondered how she had found his home, how far she had traveled while injured, and what danger still followed her. Yet beneath the questions was something else, an unfamiliar pull, a sense that this moment carried weight beyond reason. This was no ordinary return home. Fate had stepped into his cabin and claimed his bed. As night settled in, he fed the fire and sat nearby, keeping watch. The loneliness that had filled his life for years seemed to retreat into the shadows. He didn't know her name, her story, or what tomorrow would bring. But he knew one thing with unsettling clarity. The moment he chose not to turn her away, his life had already shifted. Whatever path lay ahead, it would never again be the same as the one he had ridden before. Morning light crept through the cabin window, resting softly on the woman's face. The cowboy had barely slept, spending the night in a chair by the fire, listening to her breathing and the distant cries of coyotes. When she stirred, he rose at once, careful not to frighten her. Her eyes opened slowly, sharp and watchful, scanning the room as if measuring every shadow. Pain crossed her face as she shifted, but she did not cry out. Strength lived in her silence. He offered her water, holding the cup steady while she drank. This time she did not pull away. Trust did not arrive all at once. It came in small pieces. She spoke a few words in her language, her voice rough but steady. He didn't understand, yet he nodded, hoping his calm would speak for him. When he checked her wound, she tensed, then relaxed as she realized his touch was careful, respectful. The fear in her eyes softened, replaced by something quieter, caution mixed with relief. Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain. The cowboy stepped out briefly, scanning the land for signs of pursuit. Tracks near the creek told him she hadn't arrived easily. Someone had been hunting her. The thought settled heavily in his chest. By choosing to help her, he had invited danger into his life. But the choice no longer felt optional. He returned inside, bolted the door, and set about making broth from what little he had. She watched him move through the cabin like a man at peace with his work. When he handed her the bowl, their fingers brushed. It was a small moment, but it carried weight. She met his gaze, searching for cruelty or greed, and found neither. In its place was a loneliness that matched her own. She spoke again, slower this time, pointing to herself and giving her name. He repeated it carefully, earning a faint, surprised smile. Then he said his own, feeling strangely exposed, as if names were promises. Throughout the day, they shared the space without words. She slept, woke, and slept again. He repaired a broken chair, sharpened his knife, and kept watch through the window. Each time she opened her eyes, she found him still there. As evening approached, thunder rolled across the plains. She flinched, memories clearly stirred by the sound. He added wood to the fire and sat nearby, close enough to be reassuring but not threatening. When rain finally fell, drumming against the roof, she reached out and touched his arm, just once, light as a question. He looked at her surprised and she nodded, a silent thank you. In that simple gesture, something changed. They were no longer just survivor and stranger. They were two souls choosing moment by moment to trust. And with that choice, the world outside the cabin seemed a little less powerful than the bond quietly forming within. By the third day, the cabin no longer felt like a place of rescue but something closer to a shared shelter. The Apache woman could sit up now, moving slowly yet with purpose, refusing help unless the pain truly demanded it. The cowboy admired that quiet strength. He rose early, as always, but this time the loneliness that once greeted him was gone. When he returned from checking his horse and the traps, he found her awake, carefully tending the fire the way someone who truly understood it would. The sight stirred something deep and unfamiliar in him. They spoke more through gestures than words. She showed him how to grind dried roots he had always ignored, turning them into something warm and nourishing. He, in return, showed her how to set the old rifle aside safely, explaining its danger with simple motions and patience. Each exchange felt like a bridge laid plank by plank between two worlds taught to fear one another. There was no rush, no force, only curiosity and growing respect. As her strength returned, so did the weight of reality. The cowboy noticed how often she glanced toward the hills, how her body stiffened at distant sounds. One afternoon he found fresh tracks near the stream again, newer than before. Whoever had been following her was still close. That night, he reinforced the door and moved his bedroll closer to hers, not from desire but from duty. She watched him do this and nodded once, understanding the message clearly. She was not alone. Later, as firelight danced across the wooden walls, she finally spoke more fully. Her words were broken, mixed with pauses and signs, but the meaning was clear enough. Her family had been scattered after violence tore through their camp. She had run, wounded, trusting the land to hide her. When she saw the cabin, she had no strength left to go on. The cowboy listened without interrupting, his jaw tight, his past losses echoing painfully in her story. He shared a little of his own, how the plains had taken more from him than they had given, how silence had become his only companion. In the days that followed, routine replaced fear. She helped mend his coat, her fingers skilled and precise. He taught her the names of the stars he knew, and she corrected him with stories older than his language. Laughter came easily now, soft but real, surprising them both. Yet beneath it all lay the knowledge that the world beyond the cabin would never be kind to what they were becoming. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, she stood beside him at the door. The wind carried dust and distant danger, but neither moved away. In that quiet moment, the cowboy realized something undeniable. This was no longer just about saving a life. By opening his door to her, he had opened his heart to a future he never imagined, and there was no turning back from it now. The morning she was ready to leave arrived without ceremony. The plains stretched wide and quiet, washed clean by night rain, and the air carried the sharp promise of change. The Apache woman stood near the table, tying a strip of cloth to secure her healing wound. She moved with renewed strength, yet there was a pause in her motions, as if each step forward asked a question she wasn't sure she wanted answered. The cowboy watched from the doorway, saying nothing, knowing words would only make the moment heavier. He saddled his horse, intending to guide her part of the way, but she shook her head gently. This was a road she needed to choose for herself. She stepped outside, the sun catching in her dark hair, and for the first time since he had known her, she looked fully free. Still, she didn't walk away. She turned back, studying the cabin, the repaired door, the smoke rising steady and calm, and then she looked at him. In her eyes was gratitude, yes, but also resolve. She spoke his name clearly, without hesitation, and then placed her hand over her heart. He answered by saying hers the same way, carefully, as if it was something fragile and rare. For a moment the world held its breath. Then she surprised him. Instead of leaving, she gestured to the land, to the horizon, and then to the cabin. Her meaning was simple and profound. The danger still existed, but so did choice. She could keep running, or she could stay and face whatever came. With him, the cowboy felt the weight of that choice settle into his bones. A life once shaped by solitude and routine now stood open, uncertain and alive. He nodded slowly. Whatever storms followed, they would meet them together. From that moment, the cabin transformed. It was no longer a temporary shelter or a hiding place. It became a shared home, built not just of wood and fire, but of courage. Days turned into weeks. The threats that once lingered near the hills faded, carried away by distance and time. Together they worked the land, learned each other's ways, and built something neither had dared to hope for. There were challenges, looks from strangers, moments of fear, nights when the past returned, but there was also laughter, understanding, and strength found in unity. Sometimes, the cowboy would remember the man he had been before he opened that door. Quiet, guarded, convinced the world had nothing new to offer him. That man felt like a distant memory now. The woman who had once lain wounded in his bed walked beside him, strong and unafraid, her presence reshaping every sunrise and sunset. When the cowboy returned home that day long ago, he had expected silence. Instead, he found destiny waiting for him, wounded but unbroken. By choosing compassion over fear, he gained more than companionship. He found a life richer, braver, and forever changed.